The Macho Man Randy Savage is one of the most legendary wrestlers of WWE's golden era. Between his iconic way of speaking, his flamboyant outfits, and his memorable matches at WrestleMania, he has made an impact on millions of fans to the point of becoming a real star in pop culture. It's a delight to present to you on Wrestling Paradise this new series of 3 episodes about the journey of one of the most charismatic characters in pro wrestling history. You will learn, among other things, how he found himself at gunpoint on a parking lot in the 80s, how his rather extreme attitude towards his wife, Miss Elizabeth, backstage enabled WWE to break a pay-per-view record, but also why he forced Ricky Steamboat to learn 160 steps by heart for their legendary match at WrestleMania 3. The mind-blowing number of sit-ups he did every day when he was training to become a professional baseball player. All the details behind the creation of the Macho Man character, and even the crazy explanation behind Hulk Hogan's black eye at WrestleMania 9. And you will never guess how Randy Savage reacted when a fan came to ask him for an autograph while he was in his car at a red light. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, the amazing career of the Macho Man Randy Savage. Let's go! When we look at Randy Savage's career, there's something that we can immediately notice more than anything else. His famous intensity, which made an impact on many wrestling fans, was absolutely not an act. In fact, it was quite the opposite, you'll see. In his earliest childhood, we can already see it, and we could even think that he got it from his father, Angelo Poffo, whose family is of Italian origin, and who appeared in the Ripley's Believe It or Not magazine because he had broken the world record for consecutive sit-ups. He did, hang in there, 6,033. He said that when he got to 6,000 sit-ups, he was so relieved to still be alive that he did 33 more for each year of Jesus' life, given that he was a religious man. The fact is that with a father like that, who also did 3 years in the Navy and who was even a wrestler, Randy seemed destined to become a war machine. He was born on November 15, 1952, at a time when his parents were often on the road since, unlike many other wrestlers, Angelo did not leave his family at home while he was doing shows. They will still end up settling in the house they built in Downers Grove in the Chicago suburbs when Randy was in 4th grade. You should know that with his little brother Lenny, they were wrestling fans, and at times they already practiced promos as if they were being interviewed on television. And besides, another element that will have an influence on Randy's career, as you will see, and which also came from his father, is his philosophy of making as much money as possible and not wasting it, because, according to his father, it is better to be rich and dead rather than poor and alive. Thanks to their father, Randy and Lenny will even have the chance to spend an entire school year in Hawaii by homeschooling for a few hours and going to play for the rest of the day, because Angelo got an offer to wrestle there for a whole year, and the latter also thought that it would perhaps avoid them having to fight in the Vietnam War. At school, Randy was told that he had a lot of energy and that he couldn't stay still, and he's going to put all that hyperactivity in baseball, one of the many sports that he loves. And he's going to take it very seriously with the ambition of really becoming a professional player. Apparently, during this period, he trained non-stop until he was forced to go to bed. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, and he also used to hang a tire somewhere and hit it with his bat, in particular to make his forearm stronger. He also had the ritual of doing 1,500 sit-ups a day. Once, when he had seriously injured his right shoulder, instead of stopping and not playing until it was healed, he started throwing the ball with his left hand 1,000 times a day. This intensity and this work ethic will enable him to play in minor league baseball, and in 1971, he will manage to get signed by the St. Louis Cardinals team by going with his father to a free agent tryout where he will be the only one to be selected among 300 candidates. But unfortunately for him, baseball is going to turn into a big disappointment. After several years of hard work and after being cut, he took all his bats that he always had in a bag with him. He drove home and he broke all the bats one by one on a tree. From now on, he never wanted to hear about baseball ever again, even as a fan, and he was determined to instead return to his first love, pro wrestling. Even if he was quite thin, he had the determination to become the best, and above all, that intensity that would characterize him for many years, for better or for worse. So stay tuned until the end of this episode to discover or rediscover all the details about how Randy Poffo became the Macho Man, and how he ended up having a very real war against Hulk Hogan. And believe me, you will be shocked by his story. After his dream of being a professional baseball player was shattered, Randy will focus on the goal of becoming the best wrestler in the world. And for the record, he already had an experience in the business of sports entertainment, since in 1971, when he had signed a contract with his baseball club which stipulated he could not do any other physical activity, he had still wrestled in Florida wearing a mask and calling himself Spider, which was a nod to Spider-Man, of which he was a fan. And you will see that in his lifetime, he will have a memorable interaction with the universe of the Marvel superhero. In any case, he officially started his career in September 1973 at the age of 21, after having trained with his father and his brother. And it is precisely in the International Championship Wrestling Federation, which his father created in Kentucky, that Randy will make a name for himself in the business. It should be taken into consideration that it was the time of the territories in pro wrestling, before Vince McMahon put everyone out of business by building his WWE empire, and that the Poffo family and the ICW promotion had a local competitor, and not anyone, the Continental Wrestling Association in Memphis, notably carried by the legend and future iconic WWE commentator Jerry Lawler. There, Lawler and his people were broadcast on the 5th channel, while the ICW was broadcast on the 24th. So, what did the Poffos think? That they would have an aggressive strategy towards their competitor to get noticed, since they were, in a certain way, an outlaw and rebellious federation. In their shows, they will attack the CWA and Lawler on a regular basis, to a point where Randy will even challenge Jerry several times to a match. So, at first, Lawler and his people will ignore them completely, and Randy will say that the reason Jerry is not coming is because he is a coward who is afraid to face him. He will even dare to go at the door of Lawler's house to challenge him. Another completely crazy story that happened at that time was the day when ICW guys, including Randy, attacked Bill Dundee, one of the most popular babyfaces of the rival company, in a parking lot. Apparently, there would be two versions of this incident, which is common in pro wrestling. On the one hand, Dundee says that after getting punched, he went to take his gun, which would have scared away the ICW troublemakers. But according to Randy, when Dundee pulled out this gun, he managed to grab it thanks to wrestling holds and hit him on his head with it, which would have fractured Dundee's jaw. On the same theme, we can also mention the former official who knows everything about pro wrestling history, Jim Cornette, who said he already heard some stories at that time about Randy stealing things in stores, especially steaks, and that he would have done that to get caught, be in the newspaper, and have the reputation of a madman, which he wanted for his on-screen character. And still according to Cornette, around that time, Randy lived in an apartment where there were only weight training equipment and a mattress. In the end, this strategy will pay off, since they will set up a battle of the companies together in the Great Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. During this period, Randy will also have an encounter that will change his life. While he was about to start his workout with his brother in a gym in Lexington, Kentucky, a beautiful and classy young woman will catch his attention, a certain Elizabeth Roulette. They will eventually get together, and you will see that he will take her with him into pro wrestling, which will have many consequences, to say the least. In the end, Randy will manage to get noticed by the WWE. In June 1985, he will sign a contract there, and at that time, he only had one request, that the company also signed his little brother, Lenny. He will therefore arrive in the Stamford Federation with a double reputation. The one of a wrestler who is both talented in the ring, capable of doing elbow drops from the top rope, but who also has a volcanic temper backstage. Will this personality cause problems with his colleagues and prevent him from achieving his goal of becoming the best wrestler in the world? That's what we will see in our next chapter. When Randy came to the WWE, the officials were clear with him. They were putting him on probation, and he had to have a perfect behavior not to waste what was the greatest opportunity of his entire life, namely to be able to become a star in the biggest pro wrestling company in the world. According to his brother Lenny, from 1985, there were a lot of fights backstage, but Randy was never part of them. He knew he had to put himself in his best light. On the other hand, he was obsessed with only one thing: having the best possible matches with his colleagues. And you will see that we can indeed talk about an obsession. But above all, now that he is in the WWE, Randy is facing a major challenge. How will he manage to stand out? We must realize that from a purely physical standpoint, he was far from being the most impressive guy, since he was only 6'1", whereas Hulk Hogan, for example, the biggest WWE star at the time Randy just signed, was 6'7". So of course, Randy had done a big physical transformation to be a lot bigger, and he still weighed 237 pounds. But he needed more than that. He himself also told Michael Braun, the man who created all of his outfits, that he was small in this business, and that he had to compensate for this as much as he could, so that the spectators would still believe in him. First, to really stand out, he created a character, and not just anyone, the Macho Man. In this logic, he had therefore muscled up by training intensely, but also growing a big beard, which was not very common among wrestlers in the 80s. Then he needed a name, because for Randy it was out of the question to wrestle under the name of Puffo, because his father already did it, and he didn't want people to think that he was taking advantage of his family's reputation. At that moment, he listened to the advice of some veterans who told him that, with his appearance and his way of wrestling, he looked like a savage. And that's how he renamed himself Randy Savage. As for the nickname Macho Man, we could hear that it's a nickname he was given when he was playing baseball, because he was very aggressive in his way of defending his team. But also that it was his mother who came up with the idea after Randy called her to make a list of potential nicknames for him. And that she read an article in the Reader's Digest magazine which said that the expression Macho Man was soon going to be a trend. Randy was intrigued by this expression and he ended up adopting it. In this idea of always standing out more, he is going to have a quite original theme song, since it is the music Pomp and Circumstance by the composer Edward Elgar, a symphonic and rather slow music. The complete opposite of the rock and energetic theme song of The Ultimate Warrior, for example. And for the record, it's a music that the wrestler Gorgeous George, one of Randy's father's mentors, used for his entrances. So it's some kind of a tribute to this legend of the 40s and 50s. But where Randy Savage has chosen to be even more original and innovative is in his outfits to go to the ring. He will work with Michael Braun, who is the man behind the outfits of Jimi Hendrix and the band Aerosmith. And Braun will create robes, hats, glasses, pants that will all have in common to be very colorful, often eccentric and glittery. And when we saw Randy Savage spread his wings, if we can say so, he absolutely occupied the space, and it did make him seem wider. He took his outfits very seriously since he changed them on a regular basis, and even in the way he moved, he did his best to look as massive and as tall as possible, sometimes walking on tiptoes, for example. If we add to all of this his exotic sunglasses and his bandanas, it is obvious that he left nothing to chance to stand out. And these looks also had the advantage of matching his overflowing energy that has characterized him since his youth, and these pretty crazy outfits stuck to his personality. Another major element in the construction of his character is obviously his unique way of speaking, with this very gravelly voice and his famous catchphrase that millions of fans know: "Oh yeah!" And the crazy thing is that it all started with the anxiety attacks he had at one time at the idea of cutting promos. It was something that was bothering him, and in order to improve in it, he asked his brother, who was better than him in this field, to help him. So Lanny thought about it, told himself that Randy wanted to be a savage, and so asked him what was the most savage interview he had ever seen from a wrestler. So the Macho Man thought about it and answered him, King Curtis Iokea and Pampero Firpo. And at the time when they lived for a year in Hawaii, they were watching wrestling on television, and they remembered Pampero Firpo, who said with a deep voice, "Oh yeah!" So Lanny told Randy to imitate him, which he did, and that was the revelation. That's it, he had found his voice, and even his legendary catchphrase. And what is simply incredible is what his brother also confided about this pivotal scene between them in the career of the Macho Man. After that, I never heard my brother's regular voice again. Anyway, with his appearance, his way of speaking and moving, Randy had managed to create a character that would not go unnoticed in the WWE. Especially since, in his rise, you will see that he will even stand out in another way. At the time of officially making his debut in the WWE in the summer of 1985, the Macho Man Randy Savage will do something particularly original that will help even more to make him stand out from all his cons. While he was coveted by several managers who wanted him to be their guy, he will introduce the one who will be the first lady of wrestling, his manager, while they have been in a relationship for several years in real life, Miss Elizabeth. Apparently, Randy was the one who suggested WWE to give Elizabeth a shot, and we could say that they fell under her spell too. At that moment, what we have to realize is that there's never really been a memorable on-screen couple in WWE, and more generally, it was quite rare at the time to see a wrestler with a female manager. So it was a new element that differentiated the Macho Man, which also brought more subtle nuances to his character, which is intense and quite crazy. There was an interesting contrast, I think, between Randy's wild side and Elizabeth's classy and calm side. On the other hand, being accompanied by a manager could nevertheless create a problem for him, in my eyes. Indeed, by her beauty, she could divert the attention of the Macho Man's fans, and looking forward, if he were to find himself without her one day, we could suddenly realize that, in fact, it was mainly Elizabeth who the fans were happy to see. However, on a private standpoint, it was great for the Macho Man on paper, since he worked with his wife, whereas in general, the wrestlers' wives always stayed at home while their husbands were on the road, a situation that is usually complicated for a lot of reasons. By the way, about Savage's association with Miss Elizabeth, the Canadian legend Bret Hart admitted that he was envious of him at the time, because he was lucky to have his wife with him all the time, while for Bret, life on the road was hard, because he missed his family. But what also characterized this relationship between Randy and Elizabeth was that he was a very protective person. Jerry Lawler even told that the reason Savage made his on-screen manager accompany him to the ring was to always have an eye on her. Backstage, Randy hardly let anyone approach Elizabeth, except in particular Linda, Hulk Hogan's wife. So here, this is a situation that can raise questions if we take a step back. Was their relationship going to be affected by this media exposure and all the pressure of being top superstars in WWE? But also, was Elizabeth, with her beauty, going to create some trouble among all these wrestlers who had the reputation, especially at that time, of being womanizers? In any case, these are real questions, and they will have their importance later. In the ring for Randy Savage, the exciting thing about his career from that moment on is that everything has been very progressive. They took the time to build him, to test him, to make him legit before sending him in the main event of the shows. For example, he first got matches for several months until winning the Intercontinental title in February 1986 against Tito Santana, which is traditionally the title that WWE gives to wrestlers in whom the company believes and who they want to put to the test before giving them the major title. And he will have the opportunity to defend his title in his first match at WrestleMania against George the Animal Steele on April 7th, 1986, in a clash that will last about 5 minutes. What we can mention that is really special about this matchup is what the veteran George Steele revealed about its preparation. Apparently, Randy Savage came with several pages that he had written about the execution in every detail of their match, move by move. And Steele, who was an old school guy who was used to do everything on the fly in the ring and to only know the finish beforehand, felt offended by this young colleague who was telling him what to do in every detail and ended up tearing all the pages in front of Savage, which drove Randy crazy. Steele also said that he saw how Savage behaved with Elizabeth on the day she first appeared on television. According to him, he made her walk up the steps and go between the ropes between 150 and 200 times, making sure that she didn't show her legs too much. He says he controlled absolutely everything about her. Steele felt sorry for Elizabeth when he saw this, and that's not all. Everything had to be perfect for Savage. And for example, he had told Steele that he was lazy because he had boots with zippers. But more than anything, the worst part of this whole story is the interactions with Elizabeth. While Steele was married and even had a daughter older than her, Randy was often jealous because he thought Steele had an inappropriate behavior with her. About this, the veteran told, "Randy would always be so uptight because I had to do something with Elizabeth. He would say, 'That's my wife.' I would say, 'Hey, I've got a daughter older than her, relax.' But just as I'd leave, I'd say, 'I'd have some runs with some of these young bros out here.' And then I would leave and he would be very angry. So I had him right where I wanted him. When he would come to the ring, he would be fired up." And you will see that there's a lot more trouble to come for Randy Savage and Elizabeth. In his career, the match that really made the Macho Man take a new dimension was the one he had against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 in 1987, in which he defended his Intercontinental belt. This confrontation, which is considered by some to be the best match of all time, contains 22 pinfall attempts and only lasted 14 minutes and 35 seconds, however. In my humble opinion, what makes it especially innovative at that time is the fact it was almost non-stop action all along, and a succession of false finishes, which nobody did back then, in a series of meticulously executed moves. And the secret behind the success of this match is simply mind-blowing. Indeed, in the months leading up to this confrontation, the Macho Man wrote the entire match move by move, and there were about 160 of them. And they both learned this roadmap by heart. And Savage even questioned Steamboat on the days before, asking him to tell the moves they were at specific numbers. It was all calculated, and they even rehearsed the match at Savage's house, which no one ever did back then. It is a method of total control, which is very focused on the technique, which isn't perfect for my taste, since, as the former official Pat Patterson said, "If something was screwed up, he would lose it completely, which is bad. You gotta be able to feel the people." But this way of doing things will precisely enable Savage to be named by WWE the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, for the credibility he has brought to the title through his performances in the ring. Besides, he apparently used to go at the WWE headquarters to work on his off days, which very few other wrestlers did. So for Steamboat, this approach of the Macho Man was very stressful, since he told, "We would take bits and pieces of ideas in the house shows. If we got a pop from it, I would say, we're going to use that in the pay-per-view. There were like 22 false finishes, and to remember the sequence of them, it was just... I was stressed out. I have never ever met a performer that was a stickler for critical moments and moves as they fit. Savage was a perfectionist. Even if he lost this match on a roll-up, Randy Savage now seemed legit to become a top guy. Although, as his brother Lenny says, because of this match against Steamboat that everyone considered to be the best of all time, Randy was never satisfied with anything. He kept trying to have a better match, but he couldn't. In this progressive path to the top of the WWE, Randy Savage will have his moment of glory at WrestleMania 4 by becoming the Federation's champion for the first time on March 27, 1988. On that day, there was a tournament to win the vacant belt, and he beat Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, in the final. In the tournament, Ricky Steamboat wanted to face Savage to do a rematch of the previous year, and offer Savage his revenge, but Vince McMahon was the one who didn't want to. And the crazy thing is that this triumph of the Macho Man, which still represented the first time in 4 years that someone other than Hulk Hogan was the champ, almost didn't happen because of an incident that took place 2 years before. Indeed, a certain David Peschel had filed a complaint against him because at that time, when he had the misfortune to go and ask Savage for an autograph while he was in his car at a red light, according to some witnesses, the Macho Man would have got out of his car and would have body slammed him on the ground, which in particular fractured his back. Well, it must be said that Savage was a heel at that time, but the fact is they ended up settling this situation, fortunately. But for sure, even behind the scenes, Wendy was a special character. For example, Ted DiBiase said about him that he was very cheap, which is not surprising when you remember the philosophy that his father passed on to him about money. Apparently, when they left the arena at 2 AM after a show with Miss Elizabeth, he refused to pay for a hotel room if it was only to sleep there for 3 hours, and so they slept in the car. Jim Duggan, one of his colleagues, meanwhile revealed they used to play chess with Savage backstage at the shows. The fact of the matter is that after this success at WrestleMania 4, Randy Savage had become a megastar for good. He appeared in mainstream shows on TV. He wrestled every week, knowing that in 1986 and in 1987, for example, he had more than 250 matches every year, 5 per week for 2 years, which is impressive. While backstage, many of his colleagues were jealous of him, and some were convinced that with Savage as champion, the numbers were going to be much worse than with Hulk Hogan, who at that time was more dedicated to his acting career. The Macho Man proved them wrong, since nothing changed during his reign in terms of arena attendances. The Macho Madness had taken over the fans. And it's important to keep in mind how popular wrestling was in the late 80s. For example, WWE did a show called The Main Event on February 5th, 1988 on NBC, in which there was a match between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. And you will never guess how many viewers watched it. 33 million viewers. That's more than 4 times more than the whole population of New York. Obviously, pro wrestling was incredibly popular, and the Macho Man could now share the spotlight of the company with Hulk Hogan. And we will note that the Hulkster helped Randy in his final match against Ted DiBiase, and that he even celebrated with him, which may have seemed like an attempt by Hogan to steal the spotlight from the Macho Man. But the official Bruce Pritchard told that at the time, Vince McMahon wanted all the shows to end with Hulk Hogan posing, so that everyone would be happy when they went home. And above all, in this specific case, it was a way of encouraging all the Hulkamaniacs to support the Macho Man. Now, with Randy Savage on top, WWE could create the most powerful team of all time and plant the seeds of one of its most exciting rivalries. Get the popcorn ready. At WrestleMania 5, Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan faced off, with the Miss Elizabeth who was lost. She didn't know how to handle this difficult situation. On screen, but also in real life, it is a war between the two men. The hatred of the Macho Man is very real. The event will be a success, since this pay-per-view will get 767,000 buys, which made it the best-selling show in WWE history at the time. A record that will not be broken until 1999, 10 years later, when Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock will face off for the first time at Mania. But how did we get there? To understand it better, let's go back a little bit and dive into the heart of this awesome storyline. It all started in October 1987, when Randy Savage had not become champion yet. While he was in a very bad position and that he was being attacked by the honky-tonk man, Miss Elizabeth, in her despair, went backstage to look for Hulk Hogan to help him. And in the end, at the moment when their way of playing with the crowd is amazing, and when they really took the time to make it a very memorable scene, the two men shook hands. And it's a big thing. The most powerful alliance in WWE was born. the Mega Powers. And this is the starting point of a storyline that I think will be incredibly well developed over more than a year. A progressive story, full of reality. Then, as we saw, Hogan came to help Savage at WrestleMania 4 to then celebrate with him. And a few months later, the Mega Powers will have the opportunity to prove their complicity and their power in the first SummerSlam of all time against Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase. But after their win, we will see the Hulkster take Miss Elizabeth in his arms, while the Macho Man did not see them. And he will be a little intrigued when he realizes it, but nothing more yet. He also doesn't notice this hand that Hogan puts on his sweetheart's butt. Was the Hulkster behaving inappropriately and disrespectfully? Was he lusting his friend's wife, or not at all? At that time, some elements had already been integrated in a subtle way, and they were going to be pushed further until Survivor Series 1988. After winning their match together, Hulk Hogan is once again going to be a little too tactile with the manager. And this time, Savage realizes it, and he's not happy. Later, we will see the Macho Man refuse to go help the Hulkster, who was in a bad position. At the Royal Rumble 1989, Hogan will eliminate Savage in what seems to be totally accidental. Or was it a selfish act by the leader of the Hulkamaniacs who wanted to overshadow the champion and impress Miss Elizabeth? I think it was really great to play with this ambiguity for months and gradually develop this anger the Macho Man could feel towards his friend. We were in some kind of love triangle situation, or at least a configuration in which Savage was increasingly jealous and angry with the one who is supposed to be his friend and whose behavior towards his girl seems suspicious. And at that moment, let me tell you this. Here's a story that every viewer can identify with. An angle worthy of a TV show that can remind feelings that everyone may have already experienced. It's a universal story with larger-than-life characters. Isn't that the mission of sports entertainment? All of this will lead to a very significant show in February 1989, in which Randy Savage will hit Miss Elizabeth by accident. In his concern, Hulk Hogan will carry his friend's wife by being once again very close to her and help her. For the Macho Man, it was too much. Backstage, a few moments later, in a scene where their acting feels very real, Savage will accuse Hogan of having lust for his wife, of trying to steal his girl, and he will end up attacking the Hulkster and officially turning heel, which means the end of the Mega Powers. And besides, Hogan said in his book that this Macho Man attack gave him a concussion, so we can say he didn't hold back. And that is the whole strength of this story. There was a lot of reality in fiction. According to the Hulkster, Savage was the ultimate protector in real life with Elizabeth, and this whole angle with Hogan really created hatred in the Macho Man. About him, Vince McMahon said, "In reality, Randy was so incredibly jealous of anyone that would even say hello to Elizabeth. Dealing with that was not an easy thing to do. But in regards to the WWE, there was a real story here. A natural real-life story that would be easy to do because of the reality of the situation." And all of this will culminate in this match at WrestleMania 5, after a story that was built gradually for more than a year. Personally, I am a fan of the very beginning of the show, where Vince McMahon screams with passion, "The Mega Powers explode!" while we have a beautiful visual. In my eyes, the match was awesome. Not because it had spots and non-stop action, which it hadn't, but because it told a story, with a Miss Elizabeth who didn't know what to do. We feel a real rivalry between the two men, and we understand all the ins and outs of it. As fans, we choose our side, and we want to see who will have the last laugh. Beyond the technical side of it, there was storytelling at its best, and psychology that could interest anyone. For the record, on that day, Savage was upset to do his entrance before Hogan, while he was the champion. And the match almost didn't take place because the Macho Man had an elbow infection. And, in principle, he shouldn't have even wrestled. And it should be noted that, according to the official Bruce Pritchard, Savage preferred to be a heel, even if it earned him less money in merchandising. Can you only imagine the very real consequences that this story had on the relationship between the Macho Man and Hulk Hogan? Savage will say about him that he is a punk, and that, with them, what happened behind the cameras was stronger than the soap opera we saw on the screen. In an interview on WWF Radio in 1993, where he will also admit he took steroids, Savage will say that his rival's ego is so huge that Hulk Hogan consumed Terry Bollea, which is the latter's real name. When Elizabeth and him broke up in 1992, Randy will consider that Hulk Hogan has a big responsibility in it, accusing him of having turned her against him, of having, with his wife Linda, persuaded Elizabeth, who herself admitted that she was still immature and that she didn't know what she wanted. She was missing out on great adventures by staying with Savage. About the Macho Man, Hulk Hogan said, he would say, "Oh yeah, you're looking at Liz, don't pick her up by the armpits, you grabbed her breasts." And I'm like, what? He had heat with everybody, and no one had heat with him. So it was something that turned into real life. And a few years later, in 1993, when the Hogan family invited Elizabeth while the Hulkster was filming a movie in Miami, and Elizabeth found a new boyfriend, apparently Savage came and punched Hogan, which would be the explanation behind his black eye at WrestleMania 9. The fact of the matter is that this angle of the exploding mega powers made Savage even more jealous behind the scenes, and that, in the long run, this story will have made his relationship with the leader of the Hulkamaniacs really bad. What will be next for the Macho Man after this mega power storyline? What will happen to Miss Elizabeth and their relationship? See you on the next episode to get all the answers. In the next episode, you will learn, among other things, how his love story with Miss Elizabeth captivated fans in the early 90s, while behind the scenes, the reality of their relationship was much less idyllic. Which superstar he wanted to face in the last match of his career, for which he even imagined a 2-year storyline, but which Vince McMahon refused him. But also how his rivalry with Jake Roberts, in which he was bitten by a snake, had to be stopped because of his in-laws, and even what the commentator Jim Ross revealed about the Macho Man's personality. And you will never guess the mind-blowing theory behind his WWE departure in 1994. Anyway, we were able to discover or rediscover together all the first years of Randy Savage's career, an impressive journey in which we feel all his intensity, both in his almost obsessive way of preparing his matches and in his work ethic that his father transmitted to him. An intensity that enabled him to be the Federation's biggest star with Hulk Hogan. And precisely after learning the secrets of this exciting story between the Mega Powers and Miss Elizabeth, I have a debate for you. By putting yourself in Randy Savage's shoes in this storyline, how would you have reacted? We invite you to come and give your opinion. It will be interesting to talk about it together in the comments and to share our points of view. We can say that this topic raises a lot of questions. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay in the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?